Hello, today is March 14th, 2023, a Tuesday, and we're here to discuss the economics of crime with two scholars who've done a lot of research on this. One is Nadia Campaniello, who is, I think, an associate professor these days at the University of Torino in Italy. And the other is Kevin Schnepel, who's an associate professor at Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, who happens to be sitting today in Austin, Texas, enjoying the weather, one can hope. Welcome, folks.
Thank you, Dan. It's great to be here. Dan.
Thanks for being here. Let me start off with Nadia, okay? We know educational attainment's gone up all around the developed world and the developing world too. How does education affect the kind of crimes you're going to commit? Not the amount of crime, but what kind of criminal activity you will engage in?
So we know that. So there is pretty extensive research that look at the effect of education on crime. And this was established that one of the positive externality of education is that it reduces crime. And there are many potential mechanisms at play. One of them is its incapacitation. The other one is the opportunity cost of illegal behavior. And then there are other mechanisms, but these two are the ones that have been most investigated. And so as for incapacitation, the idea is that we know that arrest rate peaks at the age of 18 and declines thereafter. And if young kids, young people are kept in school, there is an incapacitation effect that prevents them from committing crimes, of course, by definition. And this is an effect. The incapacitation effect is a direct one in the short run, but there is a nice paper published recently that shows that actually there is also a dynamic incapacitation effect, meaning that here the idea is that there is a kind of an accumulation of criminal capital, and the probability that someone engage in an illegal activity today depends on the amount of illegal activities committed in the past. So if when individuals are at a very young age, if they are prevented from committing crimes, or the criminal intensity of their activity is lower because they are kind to be forced to be in school, then we should expect also to see a decrease in criminal activities in the future.
Let me ask you this, though. My question, though, is really, yes, I believe crime will diminish with education. But let's say I'm an educated person and I'm going to commit a crime. What crimes am I more likely to commit as a college graduate?
Yes.
Assuming I want to.
See, yes. I think that to answer your question, I will go to the second mechanism very, very quickly that might explain the relationship between education and crime. And the second one is the opportunity cost of illegal behavior. So the idea is that we know that education is an investment in human capital that raises productivity and it turns wages, and thus raising also the opportunity cost of committing crimes. But this is, I would say that it's true mainly for, let's say, very simple crimes. Those crimes, petty crimes, street crimes.
Okay.
So those crimes that do not require cognitive skills, organizational skills, or social skills. So the kind of abilities that people might learn at school.
Okay, so what you're saying is I should be doing embezzlement.
Exactly. So
like that. Financial crimes.
Exactly. So the problem is that most of the researchers focus on petty crimes because we know that many white-collar crimes are unreported or are not unsolved, and for this reason, we don't have so much information about this kind of crimes.
Okay.
But for sure, we should expect high returns to education for this kind of crimes. And so, as you know that I have a paper on the Italian American mobsters, when we show that actually there is a originate in terms of education, returns to education for the guys who are at the top of this criminal organization, and the guys who are at the bottom of these criminal organizations.
I saw a paper recently subtitled, "Did Michael Corleone benefit from," you know who Michael Corleone is. He's the hero of the two Godfather movies, and he went to Harvard. I think I saw this, I don't know whose it was, maybe it was yours. Did Michael Corleone benefit from going to Harvard?
Yeah, that is we have this paper. It's Michael. Yes, it's our paper.
It's one of the best titles I've ever seen in an economics paper. My congratulations to you.
So I think it's very interesting because it points in that direction, that actually for more complex crimes, we should also expect to have high returns to education for a criminal activity in the illegal sector.
Okay, it's a Sam Bankman-Fried approach to life, I guess, right? That's the current high-educated criminal. All right, let me go on and ask Kevin something. I saw a new paper of yours on diversion. I didn't even know what it meant. So why don't you tell me what it means? And if this is a program to help reduce crime, what's the gimmick? What's going on here?
Yeah, and diversion can mean a lot of different things to different people. So I'll tell you what it meant to us. But that paper is about, essentially, it's about a second chance. So it's individuals that are coming into the courts, usually for the first time or for their first felony charge. And it's a program, the program we study is called, and it's here in Texas, called deferred adjudication. And essentially what that is it's an option for the prosecutors and judge to offer the defendant an opportunity to clear that charge or clear his or her record upon the successful completion of a community supervision program, probationary supervision. And so this is a very common program here in Texas, and we have two very sharp changes in the use of this program, and it's not uncommon in many other jurisdictions. And I think it's interesting that you mention, is this a program to control crime or to reduce crime? I think a lot of times the motivation of these types of programs is just to deal with the overload in the courts in terms of the number of cases, kind of the number of cases that the prosecutors and judges are dealing with, overcrowding. One of the sharp changes we saw in the use of this program was due to the failure of a jail expansion ballot initiative. And so the response was, if we can't send these individuals to jail, what are we going to do? And they started giving a lot more of the individuals this second chance. And so, I think a lot of times we see these policy changes or these policies and we think their motivation might be to control crime, but it also, a lot of times it's just logistical reasons that these policies are implemented. That said, there's a lot of work and a lot of thought as to these second chance programs and why, those might help individuals, especially individuals coming in with, on their first charge or on their first felony charge.
Let me ask you then, does it work?
It does. Yeah, we see massive benefits, long-term benefits associated with this second chance. And so, we had the opportunity to follow individuals 10 and 10 plus years out from this program or being offered this second chance. And we were able to link the criminal records with administrative earnings and employment, and we see 50% higher rates of earnings and employment 10 years out. And so it does seem like the individuals who get a second chance compared to those that just happen to come in the week after, they stopped using the program, who don't get the second chance, are essentially put on a different trajectory in terms of the reoffending rates that we see over kind of their life courses, as well as employment and earnings outcomes.
Let me ask this, does the benefit of the intervention differ depending upon the age at which the person is entered into the program?
Yeah, that's we do that, and if I'm remembering correctly, we do find the largest benefits for the younger participants, which I think makes sense. And we also find larger benefits amongst individuals. So if we look at all the characteristics that we can observe of an individual, and then we use those characteristics to predict whether we would see them again showing up as reoffenders or showing up back in the courts, we find the largest benefits associated with this second chance amongst the population that is most likely to reoffend. And so in the context here in Texas, it was the young African-American males that benefited most from the second chance from this diversion program.
Great, terrific. Let me go back to Nadia and ask the following. I sort of think of crime as a guy thing, okay? But there are women in prison and women do commit crimes. What kind of crimes do women commit differently from men? That's my first question on this.
Yeah, so as I said, the stereotypical criminal is a young male, but this is actually changing, meaning that, as you say, that the number of women who commit illegal activities is on the rise.
Oh, so we're having more equality. We're solving the inequality problem in crime?
Yes.
That's great.
Kind of. I'm not sure that it's a good thing, but we observe that there is a gender convergence not only in the labor market, but also in crime. And so if we look at, I have a couple of papers that use US data. And if you look at US data, you can see that basically women are mostly involved in property crimes, but this is true also, I mean, if you look at other countries, even though the number of women convicted also for violent crime is on the rise. And so this is quite interesting. And if you zoom on the type of crimes that they commit, they are mostly involved in shoplifting and in white-collar crimes.
Okay.
And I think that's kind of makes a lot of sense. I mean, of course, shoplifting is a very peculiar crime that also is also related to some psychological issues. So it's a very peculiar type of crime. But if we exclude shoplifting, then and we zoom again, we see that white-collar crimes are those in which women are more engaged. And while robbery among the property crime is the crime where you don't see so many women. So basically, if I have to kind of generalize a little bit, I would say that women are mostly involved in, let's say, crimes that require some cognitive skills. So probably to be better educated as a lot, and also where physical strength does not represent a competitive advantage.
Okay, let me ask this. So let's say we have a crime which both men and women commit. Not necessarily in the same amount, but they both do a fair number. Is there a difference in the sentence at prison time they serve? Is there any gender discrimination or favoritism in prison for the same crime? Do we know anything about that?
Yes, we know there are a few papers that look at whether the judicial system treats men and women differently, and actually, women are treated more leniently than men, even though this is also slowly changing, because there is a paper with French data that shows that women in the judicial system are not lenient with female offenders. So it's more some men in the judicial system tends to be more lenient with women, but when there is a woman in the judicial system, she's not that lenient with another woman.
Okay, so if I'm a woman committing a crime, I better have a male judge.
A male judge, yes.
And how about vice versa? If I'm a guy, am I treated more leniently by a female than a male judge?
I don't know. I don't remember if in the paper if there was something about that in the paper. So I'm not sure about this.
Okay, because a lot of work in educational programs and test grading. I have a paper on this, on the nature of the match or not, and I just wonder if any of those results carry over to the judicial system as well. But the main thing is that women are treated generally a little bit more easy, is what you're saying, right?
Yes, and that's also probably one of the reasons. There are many reasons why we observe this increase in female criminality. And again, as I said, it can also be that actually very recently, these what is called the chivalry theory in sociology, to be more lenient towards women. Probably, I mean, this attitude is slowly changing. And it also might explain a little bit why we observe more women arrested. But for sure, for many years, this is what we noticed, that there was more leniency towards. So there were these positively discriminated against.
Let me go back to Kevin and ask a question. In the US and to a lesser extent in a few other countries, a major crime-related thing is the opioid epidemic, which I thought would have disappeared now, but it seems to be as bad or worse. Let's say we do something. How much of crime, if we entirely eliminated opioid addiction, how much would property crime be reduced if we did that? Is it a biggie or is it just a small fraction of property crimes?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think, I can speak to a paper I have with Tim Moore where we evaluate the impact of heroin shortage following an epidemic in Australia. And, I think there's a lot of reasons to think it might be different today, but, in the 90s, Australia experienced an opioid crisis through heroin became the leading kind of killer of individuals, even outpacing car accidents for younger individuals in Australia. And there is some debate as to what caused the shortage, but essentially over the course of a month, the supply of heroin coming into Australia was very dramatically reduced, and it never recovered. And I think this is, it's an interesting natural experiment in terms of drug supply, maybe one that can't be repeated. Especially in a place like the United States or in Europe, where there might be supply of drugs coming from many different places. In Australia, it's an island, and it might be easier to have these effective supply side enforcement type policies. But with respect to property crime, it was quite clear there that a lot of the property crime was linked to drug abuse, and there's a lot of, I guess, offending amongst individuals who were involved with heroin, either as we observed through heroin arrests or through participation in treatment programs. After this shortage in 2000, we see a very dramatic long-term decline in property crime. This is when property crime peaked in Australia, and then it started to decline. And so we
try something else. Let me interrupt. So, look, we're going to cut the supply of heroin like crazy, but not eliminate it, right? Okay, so the price of heroin should skyrocket.
It did, yes.
Now, depending upon the elasticity, shouldn't that skyrocketing price lead to more crime?
Yes,
rather than less?
Yes, I'm glad you brought this up, because right when the shortage hits, you do see increases in property crime and kind of an escalation in the severity of property crimes that we were seeing. And so the model here is that the individuals who were addicted are very price inelastic. And so when that price of heroin doubled, they needed to generate a lot more resources to cover that much higher price. But in the long term, I think when you think about individuals entering into those various stages of addiction, or kind of the course of a an individual who becomes addicted to a drug, there was a lot less of that. And so there was, a lot of that petty crime type activity that was going on kind of in those earlier stages of drug abuse to support drug abuse wasn't happening because there were less people entering into those patterns of behavior. The other interesting dynamic, I think, when we talk about crime, so that's kind of what we see with property crime. We see it go up and then go down over the long run. We also see very large short-term increases in violent crime. And that coincides with large short-term increases in substitution to other substances such as methamphetamines and cocaine. And so, I think in terms of how individuals or how communities respond to these policies, you have this very quite dramatic, dynamic response, I guess, across different types of crime. And different time periods, right? In the short run, we saw kind of crime go up everywhere. In the long run, the violent crime and substitution kind of levels out, but then property crime continued to decline over the long run. So I think, in terms
it's
of...
very nice to see this, because it seems to me that if we were to enact something that limited opioids, we would expect to see crime drop immediately, unless we thought about it, as you obviously have, and realize this thing takes some time. Let me move on and ask a more general question, which I think people probably care about more. Okay. An awful lot of crime is committed by people who've committed crimes before, and Nadia alluded to that early on in this discussion. What do we know about what makes repeat crime more likely? Correlates, age, race, ethnicity, policies. Any thoughts on that? Let me start first with Kevin and then finish up with Nadia. Kevin, fire away.
Yeah, no, I think this concept of reoffending, we often use the word recidivism. And, I've done a lot of work in thinking about what the determinants of recidivism and what the determinants, if we think about people spending time in prison, what helps ensure a successful reentry into a community or into society. And I think in terms of my impression of my own work and the work of others in the community is that a lot of times it's hard to find things that matter in terms of reoffending. But I think it's one lesson that I've learned from the research is that you often have to look much closer at, for example, what types of job opportunities are available for people leaving prison in the US. If we look at, unemployment rates at the county level or in the community, those are a pretty poor measure of what types of opportunities might be available to individuals who are coming out of prison, who typically have very low levels of accumulated education, who are facing a disadvantage across a lot of different dimensions. And so once you start looking into the jobs that you think might matter for those individuals, then you start to see changes or improvements in reoffending recidivism rates associated with job opportunities that might matter and that might pay kind of above minimum wage, such as manufacturing, construction type jobs. And so, I think we're learning a lot more about what works, and I think that's also changing over time in terms of the key determinants of reoffending. But I think it's a really complex question, and one that would differ across countries and different places as well as different time periods. And so I don't know what
let me try Nadia. Give me a European perspective on this. Is it the same thing, or is there other things going on there?
So I never studied recidivism, but of course I know a little bit the literature, and so my impression is that it seems to me that the strongest predictor to recidivism is the number of past arrests at the individual level. And another thing that there are some studies about the type of prisons, and the effect of the types of prison on recidivism. So, for example, we have the Scandinavian type of prisons, and we have also one in Bollate that is very similar to this idea of prisons whose goal is not punishment but rehabilitation. Sure. And there is evidence in the literature that using Norwegian data and also data from this Italian prison, Bollate, it's in Lombardy, that actually this kind of prisons where whose aim is to make inmates functional members of the society, so to reintegrate them in the society after their time spent in prison, seems that they have a negative effect on recidivism, meaning that people tend to commit less crimes after time spent in prison. While we know that for more traditional, there are papers that look at more traditional prisons like the US ones or the other Italian ones, if it's not Bollate, where they find that actually time spent in prisons might increase recidivism because there is depreciation of human capital, because of peer effects, accumulation of criminal capital. So they are called, criminogenic places. While these other more again Scandinavian type of or Bollate type of prisons, inmates are allowed to work, to study. They are open prisons where they can roam around with minimum surveillance. So they are also given some kind of sense of responsibility. And so it seems that these kind of prisons are more effective in reducing recidivism.
I feel pretty good about this discussion, folks. I want to conclude because I didn't know anything about this, but it sounds like we do know something. And I asked both of our participants before we started, what does economics have to say about it? And they were both very diffident about this. And I think you guys are thinking economics. I've heard the term opportunity cost. I've heard the term alternatives. And I think that is something only economists adduce when thinking about these issues. So let us not be too modest about what we as economists can offer, because I think from what you've indicated, we do offer something, and you've offered something. Let me therefore thank both Nadia and Kevin for being here today and wish you both well. Thanks a lot.
Great.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.